The Unseen March. Commander Vex stood motionless, staring out into the expanse from the command tower of Outpost Titan. The crimson sands of planet Aravis stretched endlessly before him, the terrain untouched by life, save for the occasional dust storm that swept across the wasteland. The twin suns of Erebus were beginning their slow descent behind the jagged mountain range, casting a surreal orange glow across the sky, which faded into a deep, foreboding purple. Vex's cybernetic eye flickered as he adjusted its focus, a cold metallic hue shimmering under the heavy helmet he wore. Despite the artificial enhancements that had made him one of the most formidable officers in the sector, there was an unease in the pit of his stomach that refused to disappear. For years, this outpost had been a bastion of strength, a crucial point of defense against the alien civilizations that inhabited the galaxy's fringes. But in recent weeks, an unsettling silence had fallen over the sector. The usual traffic of reconnaissance ships and transmissions had dried up. The signs of a creeping, unknown threat were everywhere, like a shadow that stretched across their defenses. Vex was no stranger to the eerie quiet that often precedes conflict, but today, something felt different. A faint buzzing broke his trance, the sound of Zora's hurried steps echoing through the otherwise still command center. The lieutenant's face, typically calm and composed, was now shadowed with an unmistakable tension. She halted before him, glancing nervously at the holoscreen that flickered on the wall, displaying the current scan of their surroundings. Her lips parted, but words failed to escape. She had already seen what was troubling. "We've got another one," Zora finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, though the words felt heavy. "Another anomaly, Commander. It's different this time." Vex straightened, his sharp gaze narrowing in her direction. The anomalies had become a routine problem. Unidentified signals, strange distortions in their scanners that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The first few had been dismissed as system glitches, but when more followed, their concerns grew. Something was out there, something neither of them understood. And now, it seemed to be coming closer. He glanced toward the nearby console, where a holographic display flickered to life at Zora's command. A red blip pulsed slowly on the map of Erebus, its location just beyond the outer defensive perimeter. Vex's gaze fixed on it. The figure on the screen was small, but its trajectory was unmistakable. This was no coincidence. Someone, or something, was deliberately heading toward their heavily fortified position. "How long until it's within range?" Vex asked, his voice controlled, though a tinge of urgency lingered in his tone. Zora swiftly keyed in more data. "Approximately 30 minutes, Commander. Single biosignature detected." A single biosignature. That fact, paired with the strange, erratic movements of the blip on their radar, sent a chill through Vex's augmented frame. Usually, enemies of their kind approached in groups, more stealthy, cautious, and well-coordinated. But this one, this lone figure, was different. It wasn't hiding, nor was it acting with the subtlety typical of the species they had fought before. No, this one was making a clear, almost defiant march. "What is it?" Vex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The human element had become an increasingly unpredictable force in the galaxy, but never had they been so brazen. He didn't believe in coincidence, especially not after the numerous failed attempts at gathering information on the human presence in this region. They were a wild card, and this felt like a challenge. Zora hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Commander, but the energy readings are off the charts. This human, if that's even what it is generating levels of power that shouldn't be possible." Vex's eyes narrowed. "Show me." A 3D map of the approaching anomaly flickered into the air between them, each pulse of light marking the trajectory of the biosignature. The creature, or human, was moving steadily across the sand dunes, their pace unhurried. The map indicated no changes in their course, no effort to evade detection. Could it be a trap? Vex asked, his mind running through every possibility. Zora's fingers danced across the holo controls. "It doesn't seem like it. The movement patterns are strange. It's almost as if they want us to see them, like they're inviting us to do something. Vex frowned, tapping his chin thoughtfully. This wasn't typical. No enemy would willingly walk into a heavily fortified outpost without a plan, but the sheer audacity of such an approach suggested a deeper strategy, one that involved a complete disregard for their defenses. "Get me General Aldar," Vex ordered, stepping away from the hologram and striding towards the central communications console. "Now." The deep voice of Aldar crackled through the intercom as the image of the general materialized in a holographic form. His face was impassive, but the slight twitch of his mandibles betrayed his unease. "What is it, Vex?" "I was in the middle of." "General, we have a situation," Vex interrupted, cutting straight to the point. "A human, or something resembling one, is moving towards the outer perimeter. Single biosignature. They're not hiding. They're not acting stealthily. It's headed straight for us." Aldar's eyes sharpened. "And you've confirmed it's a human?" "Yes," Vex confirmed, his voice low but intense. "But there's something wrong. The energy readings are off the scale. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. This isn't just another scout or diversion. It's deliberate." There was a pause on the other end as Aldar processed the information. His tone changed from one of casual indifference to the firm decisiveness of a general. "Vex, you know what to do. Prepare all defenses. I'll have a squadron on standby in case it turns into a full-scale assault." Vex nodded, even though Aldar couldn't see him. The gravity of the situation was clear. "Understood, General. And one more thing. If this is what I think it is, Protocol Zero may be necessary." "Protocol Zero." Aldar's voice grew stern, but there was a slight hesitation. "Are you certain?" "No," Vex replied, his voice carrying a sense of foreboding. "But we need to be ready for anything." Aldar's hologram flickered for a moment, then disappeared, leaving Vex alone with his thoughts. As he turned back toward the holographic display, he found himself staring at the lone figure moving steadily toward their position. The human, or whatever it was still a speck in the distance, but the sense of impending danger was palpable. "Get ready," Vex muttered under his breath. The outpost, the crew, and the secrets they guarded so carefully were about to face a challenge unlike anything they had ever experienced. The defiant march. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one heavier than the last. Inside Outpost Titan, Commander Vex felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The lone human figure, or whatever it was, continued its steady march across the barren expanse of Erebus. The holographic display in front of him pulsed ominously, the red blip growing larger, moving with eerie determination. There was no question about it now. Whatever was out there wasn't going to stop, and neither would he. Vex turned to Lieutenant Zara, who stood at the operations console, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the scan. Her hands moved quickly, fingers dancing over the holo controls, tweaking settings, analyzing every angle. Yet, despite her efforts, the readings remained unchanged. The human, if it was truly human, was not stopping, not evading, and not responding to any of their communications. "What do you think it is, Lieutenant?" Vex asked, his voice a low rasp. He tried to keep the edge of frustration from creeping into his tone, but the situation was growing increasingly tense. They were facing something that neither their technology nor their years of training could prepare them for. Zara glanced up, her expression one of uncertainty. "I don't know, sir. There's something unsettling about the energy signature. It's like it's generating power at a scale that shouldn't be possible. And the movement, it's almost deliberate, as if it wants us to notice it." Vex's mind raced as he processed the data. If this was a human, it was nothing like the ones they had encountered before. Humans had always been resourceful, and their unpredictability made them dangerous. But this felt different. No human would walk into a heavily fortified outpost without some kind of plan, some backup, or at least an escape route. This one, however, seemed to be walking straight into the jaws of a trap, confident and unyielding. Is it even possible for a human to generate this kind of energy output? Vex asked, half to himself. Zara didn't answer immediately. She was scanning through more data, running simulations in real time. Not with any technology we know of, she finally said. I've never seen anything like this before, but there's one possibility. This could be a new type of human weapon, something beyond anything we've encountered. But why would they send only one? That doesn't make sense. Vex nodded slowly, trying to keep his mind clear. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious, but there was a part of him that was also intrigued. Who was this individual, and what were they truly capable of? His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of General Aldar, crackling through the communications channel. Commander Vex. Aldar's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge of concern in his tone. Are the defenses up and running? Vex didn't hesitate. Yes, General. All weapon systems are at full power. Automated drones are on standby. And we have enough firepower to level a city. If this human decides to get hostile, we'll be ready. A pause came through the comms. Then Aldar responded, his voice low and deliberate. Keep your guard up, Vex. I want that human alive if possible. We need to understand what they're capable of. But if it becomes a threat, you know what to do. Vex acknowledged the order, his mind already shifting gears. He could feel the tension in the air as the countdown continued, the seconds ticking down to the moment of impact. The human, or whatever it was closing in on their perimeter. At this point, there was no turning back. Understood, General, Vex replied. He gave Zara a quick look, and she immediately started typing commands into the console, connecting with the automated systems that controlled the external communications and the primary defense grid. Prepare to engage in 5 minutes, Zara reported. I'll issue one final warning before we activate the primary weapons. Vex didn't speak. Instead, he turned back to the massive panoramic window that overlooked the vast desert below. The human was now visible to the naked eye, a dark figure against the horizon. Despite the enormity of the landscape, the figure stood resolute, unflinching. It was almost as if they didn't care about the defenses in place, the impending danger. They were still advancing with a sense of purpose, without hesitation. Unbelievable, Vex muttered. They think they can just march in here without consequence. What do they want? What could they possibly hope to achieve? He didn't have an answer, but there was one thing he did know. This wasn't a normal incursion. This wasn't just another scouting mission or a reconnaissance run. No, this felt personal. This human was on a mission, and they were prepared to risk everything to see it through. Commander, Zara said, breaking the silence, they're entering weapons range. We have visual confirmation. They're less than 2 minutes out. Vex felt a sharp pang of realization. It was time to act. Patch me into external comms. Now. A moment later, his voice boomed across the vast desert landscape, carried on waves of electromagnetic sound. Human, he called, his voice crisp and authoritative. You have entered restricted space. Halt your advance immediately, or we will open fire. This is your final warning. The words echoed into the emptiness, but there was no response. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Vex's frustration grew, but he kept his composure. There was something about this silence that unsettled him. It was as though the human was not only ignoring their warnings, but actively challenging them. Still nothing? Vex asked, turning back to Zora. She nodded grimly. Still nothing, Commander. I'm starting to think they're either too arrogant to care, or they have something up their sleeve. Either way, we're getting close to having to make a decision. The clock on the console ticked down, and Vex felt his grip on the situation slip just a little further. The human was nearly there. And still, they walked toward them without fear, without hesitation. Prepare the full grid, Vex ordered. If they're not going to listen, then we'll have to make them understand. Yes, Commander, Zara replied, her voice steady but tight. "Activating primary weapons in 30 seconds." Outside, the wind had picked up, and the distant figure of the human seemed even smaller against the vastness of the desert. But there was something about the way they moved that made Vex's instincts flare. The air was thick with the tension of what was about to come. The human, now almost within sight of the outpost's fortified walls, paused for a moment. It was as if they had anticipated the warning, the preparations, and the incoming response. And in that moment, Vex could almost swear he saw a slight smirk cross the human's face. Before he could react, the human raised their arms to the sky. "What in the hell?" Vex whispered under his breath, his heart racing. The human began to glow. A strange, unnatural light emanated from their body. It was the kind of light that made the hairs on Vex's exoskeleton stand on end. It was as if the very desert had bowed to the human's will, responding to their power. The air itself seemed to crackle with raw energy. And then, with no further warning, the human took another step forward, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The power surge. The desert air was thick, vibrating with an electric hum that was impossible to ignore. Commander Vex's senses were on edge, his enhanced vision fixating on the figure just outside the perimeter of Outpost Titan. The strange glow emanating from the human, no, from the being that was approaching, sent ripples of tension through his body. It wasn't just a flare of energy. It was as if the very fabric of reality around the human was being altered, warped. The closer they came, the more it felt like the ground beneath Vex's feet was shifting. "Commander, the readings are escalating." Lieutenant Zara called out from the console, her voice tinged with disbelief. Her eyes were glued to the rapidly changing data flashing on the screen. Whatever that human is, they're not just emitting raw energy. There's something more. Vex turned, his cybernetic eye scanning the data stream. It was true. This wasn't just high-level energy. The frequencies and radiation patterns were unlike anything they had ever encountered. The signature was far too complex, almost as if it were layered with different types of radiation, crossing boundaries that the outpost equipment couldn't fully interpret. No human technology could create this type of output. It was otherworldly. He stepped forward, his boots clanging on the steel floor as he approached the tactical table. His crew scrambled to prepare the final line of defense, but even as they worked, he knew it was all in vain. This human, this figure, was not one they could simply shoot or overpower. This was something different, something that had the potential to change everything. "Any sign of weapons?" Vex asked, his voice cutting through the tense silence in the room. Zara shook her head. "No weapons are being registered, but the energy source is definitely radiating from the human itself. There's no signature of a vehicle, no signs of any external machinery. It's as if the energy is part of them." Vex's mandibles clicked in frustration. They had prepared for every conceivable enemy: alien invaders, mercenary strikes, even a full planetary assault. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for this. A single human, no, a single being, coming straight for their gates with the power to bend the rules of physics. He glanced at the tactical readout again. The human had crossed the final line of the outer defense perimeter. They were almost within range of the outpost's automated weapons, the heavy cannons that could obliterate any threat within seconds. And yet, the human didn't pause, didn't hesitate. It was as if they were daring the entire outpost to make a move. "Activate the comms," Vex ordered, his tone growing sharper. "Give them one last chance to respond." Zara hesitated for a fraction of a second before tapping the command. "Human, you have entered a military installation and are trespassing in a restricted area. This is your final warning. Halt immediately, or we will use lethal force." The words rang out across the desert, amplified by the external speakers. For a moment, Vex thought he saw the human flinch, but then, to his growing horror, the figure raised both hands above their head. A brilliant arc of energy crackled from their fingers, splitting the sky in a jagged burst. The force of the electrical discharge sent a wave of heat across the entire field, and the ground seemed to tremble underfoot. Zara quickly analyzed the energy pulse. "Commander, this can't be. The intensity of the surge, it's mimicking an EMP." Vex's heart skipped a beat. If the human had just unleashed an EMP, it meant they had the power to disable every piece of technology in the outpost. Weapons, communication, defense systems, everything would be rendered useless. But that wasn't all. The signature of the energy wave was still building. The human wasn't stopping. The glow around them intensified, brighter and brighter with every passing second, the air around them crackling with raw energy. It felt as though the atmosphere itself was bending, warping under the pressure of the surge. "We need to shut down the systems," Zara shouted, her voice laced with panic. Now. Vex had no time to argue. The human had just shown them that their entire network could be compromised with a single move. He swung his arms into the control interface, deactivating the primary power grid. The lights in the command center flickered, and the low hum of the machinery that had once filled the room went silent. But the hum of the human's energy only grew louder, filling every corner of the outpost with an oppressive, buzzing sound. The lights didn't go out in the desert below. Instead, they intensified, casting a harsh glow across the sands, as if the very environment was feeding the human's power. It was no longer a human versus alien scenario. This felt like a battle of cosmic proportions. "Commander, I don't think we can stop them," Zara said, her voice trembling. "I've never seen anything like this. The energy is..." Before she could finish, the human, still standing firm in the center of the desert, flicked their wrist, and an enormous bolt of lightning shot into the sky. The strike was unlike any natural storm, cutting through the air with terrifying precision. The sky above the outpost shimmered, and the electrical charge danced in the atmosphere, forming a jagged pattern of veins that spread like webs across the heavens. It wasn't just a storm. It was the human's power made manifest, a chaotic, destructive force tearing at the very fabric of the air around them. Vex's mind raced. The human was powerful. No, they were something more than human. This wasn't just an individual. This was an anomaly, a being whose abilities defied comprehension. And now, it was clear. The human didn't intend to invade. They weren't seeking information. They weren't looking to conquer. They were sending a message, a warning. "Commander, we're losing control." Zara's voice snapped Vex back to reality. Her fingers flew over the panels, but each attempt to regain control was met with failure. The defense grid is gone. The drones are offline. Even the backup systems are down. We've been completely neutralized. Vex clenched his fists. His mind raced through all the protocols, all the contingencies he had been trained to consider, but none of them applied here. The human was no ordinary adversary. This being didn't just seek to overpower. They were manipulating the very nature of power itself. "General Aldar." Vex spoke into the communication panel. "We have a situation here. The human's energy output is unlike anything we've ever encountered. We are compromised." A brief pause came from the other end. "Vex, you need to make a decision. The human cannot be allowed to breach the outpost. We need to end this before they break through our last line of defense." Vex looked back out toward the human, who now stood motionless in the desert, their arms lowered but their energy still crackling in the air like a storm waiting to be unleashed. This was more than a test of their defenses. This was a test of everything they believed in. And the answer wasn't clear. "This may be the end," Vex muttered to himself, watching the human as the world seemed to pause around them. The storm of energy was reaching its peak. A decision had to be made, and soon. Would they fight back? Or would they take a step into the unknown?